What's up, Salt Strong Nation? Joe Simons, Lick Diamonds. We got Lukey Simons and Tony, the Italian fish slayer, Acevedo. Dude, we haven't had the three of us on in quite some time.
Yeah, it's been way too long.
Been a minute.
Just so happened that I was looking through some of our stats after all of these crazy amount of reviews came in. Thank you all who have taken the time to do it. And by the way, you don't know what's happening here in the month of September 2019, we are giving away a free fishing trip to fish with Luke and I. Maybe even Tony will come along. You never know. I know he's a little bit scared to get in boats because he's a kayak guy. But we're giving away a free trip. We've had a lot of people ask for it, and the one thing that we're really trying to do is explode this podcast. It's already the #1 most downloaded saltwater fishing podcast in all of iTunes. So thank you so much for that. We are trying to take it to the next level. And the biggest way to do that is with amazing guests. The best way to get amazing guests is with more downloads and more reviews. And so that's what we ask from you guys is put a review on there in iTunes and then take a screenshot and then email it to us, fish@saltstrong.com, and you will automatically be entered into this giveaway. Sometime in the first week of October, we will be announcing that. So just wanted to put that out there. So anyhow, back to where we were. We got Tony back on. We got Luke on. I was looking at the stats, and some of our most downloaded podcasts were some of the old ones. I went back like old school and saw some of the ones that we did just like this that were some trainings with, a little bit of this. If you're watching on YouTube, you're able to see this. If you're listening on the podcast, we are going to show some screenshots, but you should still be able to get the gist of what we're talking about and still get a ton out of this. And this entire episode is going to be on what we call internally here, smart fishing spots. What the heck are smart fishing spots? Well, I'm glad you asked. It's basically just taking online satellite maps that are free and combining it with science, with trends, with tides, with weather, basically knowledge, right, of what's going on around you and basically predicting how these fish are going to be moving. And then you tie that in with these free online maps, and then boom, you got smart fishing spots. I gave one of my buddies an analogy because he was asking me, like, what is it? I was like, all right, imagine this. I give you GPS coordinates. I just give you a spot. And I tell you, this is a really good redfish spot. Would you like that? And he's like, yeah, that'd be awesome. I was like, all right, cool. What if I gave you something that was similar, and I said, all right, I'm going to give you the same GPS spot. I'm going to tell you it's a good redfish spot, but I'm also going to tell you, like, this is the absolute best spot to fish in the month of September on a full moon, on an incoming tide with this exact same lure at this exact same depth. Which one would you take? And he's like, all right, I get it. The second one, the latter, is a smart fishing spot. Whole different ballgame. So, Luke, Tony, dude, I don't even know where do we begin? Tony, do you want to kick it off with all your spot dissection magic and kind of tell a story on how this all came about?
Yeah, I mean, when I first started inshore fishing, I really didn't think too much into online maps. I was mainly a bass fisherman, and for me, bass fishing and looking at online maps really didn't do much just because lakes are lakes. You can't really see the depth or the bottom on lake images, and all you see is grass all around the shoreline. So it's really just getting out there and finding the fish. But what I found with inshore fishing, because it's such a shallow water environment, you can see a lot from the maps. You can see depth contours, you can see structure, grass, potholes. Even if there's an oyster bar that's submerged, you can see those things on the maps. And it's not really just about knowing what you're looking at, but knowing all the other factors that come into play to actually go to those spots. So you really have to know what you're looking at and why you would go to a spot, as opposed to just saying, okay, that spot looks good, I'm going to go there and check it out. So I do have an example here. I'm just going to do a screen share.
Ooh, we love screen shares. And by the way, while he's pulling this up, for all of you who are not currently Insider members, Tony does this every single week. We have a massive library where he picks a random spot anywhere from usually Texas up to Virginia and just picks a random spot. Usually it's from a spot where we have quite a few new insiders who have asked for it. And he'll go in there and on an online map, record the whole thing and just dissect the heck out of it. And even a lot of these places you've never fished before in your life, and people right in, they're like, oh my gosh, this place was money. It's exactly what you said was going to happen. So the dude knows his stuff.
And the best thing about it is these trends and these tactics, when I'm dissecting these spots, they can apply to wherever you may live, as long as the spots are similar, if the type of structure and cover is similar and the conditions are similar. Because what you'll notice about the east coast of Florida, or the east coast of the United States, really all the way from, I'd say, about St. Augustine, Jacksonville, all the way up to Virginia, you have pretty much similar types of structure in those areas. You have a lot of coast or marshy coast areas. You have a lot of backwater areas. So let's see if I can get back to that spot I was just looking at. And it was Paris Island. And that's another thing about these spot dissections, is a lot of these spots I haven't even been to, but I will use what I have experienced fishing in other places and apply it to those same spots. And I'll get feedback from our members that have fished the spots, and they're pretty much confirming what I'm looking at here on the map. For example, this one spot over in North Carolina, notice all these creeks and kind of this marsh area. You have all this, I believe it's that tall grass that sticks up out of the water. And something I always look for when I'm fishing in an area, or if I'm looking for an area to fish, when I'm looking at the map, is something unique or something that's different. As you can see, all this is pretty much the same. You have all these winding creeks, and then all of a sudden you've got this shoreline that has trees pretty much right up against the shoreline. And you can see there's a shadow line there. And if you're fishing in the summertime, it's really hot, especially because of the way that shoreline is facing. As we all know, the sun rises in the east, sets in the west. So pretty much all morning, those fish are going to have shade right along that shoreline. Really, no matter what the tide's doing, they could push down a little bit deeper into the creek, or they could push up closer to the trees and have shade in the summertime. So those are just little things you really have to pay attention to when you're looking at the map. You have to factor in, where the sun's going to be, which way the wind's going to be blowing, what the tide's doing, and that will determine where the best spots will really be.
That's really cool.
And that's a good example as well, because I started bass fishing just like Tony, and that's, bass fish kind of go around the lake, but with these maps, if you didn't have the map, it would be extremely difficult to find that spot, because there's so much marsh all around. You basically have to follow that little creek way up, but it can take seconds just to identify it from these satellite maps. It's just one of many examples of the how powerful these things can be.
So
yeah,
I'll go for it, Tony.
I was going to say, the nice thing about that too is you can do your homework at home, and then we all pretty much have smartphones right at our fingertips when we're on the water. So if you need to double check to see where you're at, you can just open up your phone and open up the maps and see where you're at.
So personally, I never would have found that spot. And for those of you listening to the podcast, I think, like you said, it kind of looks like a little marsh. I'm guessing some sawgrass and stuff like that. And but once you zoom in, I think it's intimidating, right? For most people, including me, I never would have found those shadow lines. It makes complete sense when you just showed it to me and zoomed in. But like, how are you doing that? Like, I guess a better question is, you go to a brand new spot, you're going to explore a new area, you get on the map, like what's the first thing your eye's looking for? You mentioned something different. Are you looking for different cuts, or like, is there something that you always try to go to first?
It's typically a color change, whether it's on the shoreline or in the water. When you're zoomed out on the map, you can see here, you have all this area, and then you have this dark green area, which is obviously trees. So I just zoomed in there and I looked to see if any of those trees were along the water. Now, you do have this long shoreline with trees up against it, but it's such a big area that it would kind of be hard to pinpoint where the fish are. When you have a smaller isolated area like that, that's definitely something I'm looking for, just to narrow down where the fish are. So again, when you're looking at the map, look for color changes, because that'll usually dial in where you want to be looking, whether it's on the shoreline or if it's actually in the water. Those color changes are good determining factors, really, as to where I'm going to be starting to look for a good spot.
And that was good. So for those of you listening, he was actually zoomed out pretty far in the beginning to just kind of get an idea if there's anything that stood out. And I see it now. How obviously I'm staring at it, but that green area is kind of right there. It looks like its own little island. And man, that's awesome. Luke, what do you think? Have you similar thoughts when you go to a new spot using maps?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. And the core premise is, and this is what we teach in our courses, is that it's really about structure. It's about maximizing structure, because these fish that we're targeting, redfish, sea trout, snook, flounder, they're all ambush predators. So they're all going to be holding near structure. They're all going to be feeding near structure. And so the worst thing you could possibly do is be fishing an area that's like totally flat sand or flat bottom with nothing. And we can use these maps to find a lot of structure. Even in areas with murky water, you can still identify a ton of different forms of structure, like points, like the marsh creeks, like Tony was showing. Obviously, islands that are totally above the water, you can see oyster bars. I mean, you can see a ton of helpful things from these maps. And I generally go by, I'm a financial analyst by trade, at least I was before Salt Strong. And so I just know that as long as I maximize the different forms of structure in one given spot, I'm going to have a higher chance of finding predator fish there to catch. So I get on these things, and looks like you're over in Texas now, and I would just go in and look for islands. I basically look for as many different forms of structure as possible in like one small area, say like within a couple 100 yards. And then so in one spot I can kind of go around and then start fishing them to kind of probe out to see what exactly is holding the most. Sometimes it's going to be an oyster bar, sometimes it's going to be a depth change, sometimes it's going to be an island. But if you get into one spot that has a lot of stuff, you can find out what they're holding on much faster than if you're kind of going blind.
And shadow lines as well, right? I mean, Tony just mentioned it, and I know we had that one guy, Luke. We call him the Jacksonville heckler. I don't even remember his name, but it was a guy who wrote into us and was saying, "Oh, this whole online map stuff, it doesn't work." And I live in an area with really murky water and really crazy tide swings, and it won't work here. And so Luke got on the map, did a little video for him. And I mean, I saw what you did. I mean, you showed all these different shadow lines. Like, man, this is all forms of structure. Even though it's not traditional structure in terms of something that you see under the water, it can work. And the guy ended up, long story short, he ended up going to fish the area. And what did he say, Luke? That was one of his like top areas. Like, he basically completely nailed the best spot in his entire area.
Yeah, and the premise was exactly what Tony did on that spot in Virginia. Is he was following that creek, and there's one part of that little creek had basically was touching an island, was touching the trees. And so that case in Jacksonville, there's just a lot of creeks over there. And so if you find one creek with oysters, great, there's 1,000 of them. But there was one in particular that actually had docks. The other ones didn't. And so that was really what triggered me to highlight that. Is I just went down, I was following a creek, and it all looked pretty good. It has some oysters. There's a bunch of points, but only one area, and that like one spot in that whole area had docks, and there were 3 of them. And so that those, that's just something different that those fish would key in on. At least I thought they would key in on. And by his reply, they certainly were, because that was just like a textbook type of spot to look for in an area like that.
Tony, you got you're back to Paris, or do you want to share something in Texas?
Oh, I was just going to show another example, just color change, and what Luke was talking about, having multiple different types of cover and structure in one spot to easily or quickly find a fish. As he was mentioning, islands, looking for grass. As you can see, this is all a big grass flat right here. You could tell just kind of by that camo pattern. You have a dark green, and then you have these lighter areas, which are potholes, sandy areas. And this was a good example right here. You can see you have a little string of islands right here, or it might just be one island. You have a couple out here. You have some shallow water, shallow flats, and then you have a deeper cut right through here. So you can pretty much go through this area, fish the deeper edge, see if the fish are there. If not, move up closer to the island, see if they've pushed shallow. If not, you can push a little further out to the flat, see if maybe they're out in the potholes. And again, it'll really determine, what will determine where the fish are is really going to be the time of year, and also what the tide's doing. If the tide's moving out, those fish are going to push down towards the edges or down into the deeper potholes. If the tide's up, the fish are going to push up. So they may push up closer to the island. So that was just a little example right there of having a lot of different things in one area, so you can kind of narrow down what the fish are doing and the trend for the day.
And this is Port Aransas, Texas. So let's, while you're here, let's talk about just this area in general. You know, I mentioned earlier, I mean, the definition of what we call our smart fishing spots is finding cool structure like this and then tying in all of the science and the trends and the tides and the weather and all that. So you kind of touched on a little bit, like what time of year, like when would this be one of your ideal spots and why?
Well, just based on how close it is to this pass right here, usually in the summertime and also into the fall, that's typically when I would target areas closer to the inlets and the passes, just because you're going to have cooler ocean water coming in, which will help cool down those flats on an incoming tide. And also in the fall, redfish, especially the big breeder redfish, they need more salinity in the water when they are breeding and spawning. And usually around full moon in the fall, those redfish will start spawning. There's a stronger current, so it helps disperse their eggs into the bay or the river, wherever they're at. And that strong incoming tide will help do that. And also the salinity helps their eggs float. More salt in the water, the more dense the water, the eggs can float, they can disperse around so that they don't get eaten, and you have more redfish in your area. So this would definitely be a fall, summer type of area right around here by this pass.
So if you guys missed that, what did I hear? Full moon, in the fall, incoming tide, big bull reds.
Pretty much.
So have you ever fished Port Aransas before?
I've never fished there, but I have done spot dissections in this area and have gotten a lot of good feedback from it. People going out there catching fish on these flats around. I think it was Redfish Bay was a good area that people were catching a lot of good fish at. And as you can see, it's all pretty much similar. So if you find a similar pattern, let's say you fish this little area right here, you find a similar pattern, you want to figure out what those fish were doing, what tide it was, also what type of structure they were holding on, and you can pretty much duplicate or replicate that on all these other flats out here. But again, you also want to make sure there's activity in the area. So on the water assessment is pretty much just as important as actually doing your pre-planning and looking at these maps.
Yeah, and just to add one thing to that too, and as far as importance, the type of spot is way more important than an actual spot. Like Tony said, you know, if I hear somebody catching fish, I'm much more interested on like what type of area it was. Was it on an oyster bar? Was it on a grass flat? Or was it on mangroves? Than I am that I'll never ask the actual spot. First of all, it's just more fun finding your own spots. But once you know that the type of spot, that's generally going to be the trend, which will generally hold for a while until there's a significant weather change. And so if you know what type of spot to look for, and you know how to use these maps, you're comfortable with these maps, you can just quickly scan, you know, miles and miles of coastline to identify the areas with that type of spot, like with those, you know, those best types of spots. And that's your list of spots to check out. So type of spot trumps like an actual specific spot.
Isn't it ironic though that we all do especially me, you know, you hear about someone catching big fish. Oh, where were you fishing? Everyone wants to know that exact spot. And we should be asking what type of area were you fishing? And then using that, you know, basically that knowledge, the trend to find more. So stay here real quick, Tony, this Port Aransas area. Why I was looking back at all of the podcasts, one of the most downloaded ones ever was the 9010 podcast. That was, I believe that was just you and I, Luke, and we'll put a link in the show notes so you can go listen to that one. It's a really awesome one. And the whole premise was that 90% of the feeding fish are in 10% of the area. So like, let's just take this screen right now. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you're not, just imagine we're looking at an area here in Port Aransas, Texas. It's basically a big flat with some grass, a few pieces of structure, but that 90% of the fish are going to be in a really small area. And I think what Tony and Luke do really well subconsciously is when they are looking at a map, they automatically eliminate not 90%, but probably 70% of the bad areas. Just like boom, out of their head, it's not going to be good. And then they just keep kind of whittling it down until they find that 20 to maybe 10% mark. And that's where all the fish are, right? So let's talk about that, guys. when you're looking at an area like this or any area, how are you using that 90-10 rule? And are you doing that like subconsciously? Do you think you're eliminating all the areas that just are probably not good and just trying to find those small amount of areas where most of the fish are going to be feeding?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when you're looking at this flat, first thing you notice is all the grass. There's pretty much grass all over this flat from this image. So I'll pretty much eliminate all the grass.
Wait a minute, I thought grass was good. What's going on here, huh?
Grass is good, but if you have too much of it, it's going to be hard to pinpoint where those fish are. So that's why you want to look for that little thing that's unique that may be on the grass flat. So just like that area I just showed, as you can see, it was this little area with a deeper cut, and then you had some islands around it. That would be something unique on this entire flat. So you can see that's probably 10% of this area. And if we say this area, I'm talking about this flat right here. So that could be 10%. And then right over here on this corner, you can see you got an island, then you got a cut going through. Then it looks like you have a deeper little pocket right here, right in between these two islands. So again, that's another small area. That's about 10% of the area. And that would be something I would look for. And then let's see if we can find something else here. I would say this corner. Corners are always good. Fish, especially redfish, they like to travel down shorelines. And then when they get to a corner, they'll either stop because usually wind and current will blow bait into those corners. So it creates a feeding zone for those fish. So that's pretty much how I break it down whenever I'm looking for a good spot in an area, is just look for that one thing that's unique and cancel out everything else. And then after you've looked at it, kind of analyzed it, try to find other areas that are similar, because those could be really good hot spots for fish.
And if you missed the whole 90-10 premise, what Tony was saying is most people go in trying to just find the good spots, and that's critical, but just as important is eliminating as many spots as you can to find the good spots, right? I mean, we use that haystack analogy on the 90-10 podcast, where he said, imagine someone gives you a massive bale of hay and says, hey, there's a needle in here. It's pretty intimidating, right? It's kind of looking at one of these maps in a brand new area and trying to find where the fish going to be. And on the flip side, if someone took out 10% of it, so threw away 90% and gave you basically just a big handful of hay versus a massive 6-foot bale and said, hey, it's in here, it's a whole lot easier to digest. So I think you guys do a really good job. And by the way, if you're listening to the podcast, basically Tony found what I would zoom back in that little pocket. It looks like a boomerang. If a little bit north there of you. Yeah. It kind of looks like a little boomerang, and he was basically just saying inside of that boomerang is going to usually be a good place. So if you ever see a boomerang looking shape of an island, I would fish it.
Yep. If a shoreline or
that's probably horrible advice, by the way, but I'm going to fish it either way. If I see a boomerang, I'm fishing it.
Yeah, but they can be on the points and the cove. Yeah, it's because both of them are ambush types of spots. The coves will. Those predators can kind of lock in the prey and use it to their advantage. And the points, those bait fish usually have to go around them, and the points are generally the best, especially in the summertime. Lately, I've only been fishing points. That's been the trend. Well,
so speaking of that, we're now, and depending on where you live, but here in Florida, it feels like it's very weird. It's just always hot, and then all of a sudden it gets cold one day. So technically speaking, we're now into the fall, even though it doesn't feel like it, in the summer, early fall. Where are you guys going? What are you looking for? You mentioned like this one, Tony, you're still in most cases looking for areas like this a little bit closer to passes and inlets.
Yeah, pretty much, because it really takes a really strong cold front or a few cold fronts to really reduce the water temperature. So fish are still going to hang out in their summertime spots, but they may be on the move quite a bit. Bait fish is going to be really abundant in the fall. Also, the bait fish are going to be bigger. So different baits, you're going to want to be throwing bigger baits. And also when you're out there on the water, like I said, fish are going to be on the move. So they might be in one spot one day, and then they're going to be in another spot in the other day, especially redfish, because again, it's spawning season. Those fish are going to be on the move to get their job done for the spawning season. So that's why I like to stick around the inlets and passes in the fall, late summertime and into the fall.
Cool. Luke, similar?
Yeah, similar. And as somebody said, these fish are on the move, and yeah, the points have been good because they have to move around, and those points are good ambush spots. And given that they're on the move, they're going to stop for two reasons most of the time. And one is structure, right, to ambush prey, and the other one is just where the easiest meal is. And so so just finding the areas with the most bait fish, just that alone will oftentimes result in some good success. And but not just bait fish. If there's just bait fish out in the middle of the bay where there's no structure at all, you're not going to be catching snook and redfish and trout. But if there's like seagrass on the bottom, or if there's some depth changes, or especially if it's like up close to an island or like a creek point, if you find bait along areas like that, there's almost always going to be some predators nearby.
Cool. Luke, did you want to take the controls on this and talk through any spots?
No, I mean, I just say I was gonna just point out the same types of stuff because again, it's not about spots; it's about the type of spot. And as we said before, it's just maximize the structure. What Tony was going through when he was going through that flat with all the seagrass, if that was a mud flat and there was like one little small patch of seagrass, that would be awesome. Like that would be a thing to identify. But given how much seagrass there was, that's great. That's great, but what's different? And like Tony said, and he was going around and looking at the areas that had islands, that had depth changes, that had land points, that had underwater points. All of those are just different forms of structure. And again, that is generally maximize the structure, you're going to maximize your results. It's kind of the saying that we usually have.
Cool. Tony, can we maybe go pick a spot in Florida, maybe one that you've dissected or fished or whatever, and just to show that, right, that it's all about the type of spot that you're going to be able to see almost the similar, and not exact, because obviously in some areas have different types of trees and stuff like that. We have mangroves and stuff, but for the most part, you're going to find this same structure wherever you go. And I mean, it's interesting, Luke, we were just in Louisiana with Captain Mark Johnson, and we've, been there with C. Richardson, two guys who have both, been fishing coaches here at Salt Strong. And, both of those guys did tournaments for many years, and they fished Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida, and South Carolina. And, now Mark lives down in the Keys. CA lives over on the West Coast. They both go to Louisiana, and they're all using this same stuff. They're, both nights that we were hanging out with them, having a beer before we went out the next day, guess what we were all doing? We were using these online maps, trying to use the exact same intel to find spots. And if you talk to both those guys or anyone who does a lot of tournaments, like we had that father-son team, the Cowarts, on, and they said the only two things that really matter, like really separates the good guys, the guys who are winning money versus the ones who are struggling, are using online maps, like knowing the trends and having a network. That was it. I mean, it was those two things. And CA said the same thing. It's like, man, when you're traveling, all these guys know how to catch fish, right? I mean, if you're a tournament angler and you're traveling and doing it for a living, you know how to fish. What separates you from getting first place to fifth is your network, and how well you can read maps and understand the trends.
But and just to that point, network is not just for traveling too. And that was the biggest thing that I learned, is that network was the biggest influence of anything. Because once you can read maps, that's great, but on the water knowledge, on the water intel, and recent on the water intel is the most important thing you can have. When I was doing those tournament series, the biggest thing that helped us was, there's me and my buddy Nick, and then we befriended some other guys that we were competed against, and we were all, none of us were guides, all of us had full-time jobs off of the water, and so we were just sharing tips, and we were just sharing reports with each other. And throughout the season, I mean, all of us were doing extremely well. At least one of us was on the leaderboard every single tournament, and it was just because we were just sharing intel. So we all knew where each other fished, which was cool. Like we all knew, we were just talking about the types of spots, and so then we were all just fishing the same types of spots that were trending, and we were all catching really good fish, and we were doing it consistently. So that was the biggest learning lesson that I had is yes, map reading is great, but the network is the biggest catapult of anything.
Man, I'd give anything if there was a network of 8,000 plus inshore fishermen who are all willing to share and help out. Oh, wait, there is the Insider Club. All right, so Tony, you got a new area here. Where are we? Big Hammock Point?
Yeah, this is, let me see if my screen will load here. Yeah, Choctawhatchee Bay up in the Panhandle. And I just wanted to point it out, something that Luke was sort of mentioning. If you happen to be on a mud flat or a sand flat where there's really no seagrass, especially on the east coast of Florida, that's usually where I'm fishing, and we have a lot of dead areas. A lot of seagrass has died off. It's pretty much just sandy, muddy areas, not much on the bottom. And the good thing about maps is you can actually see what's on the bottom in those areas. And like I was saying, you want to look for those areas with color change. So as you can see, this is a big, long, sandy stretch of shoreline here that drops off pretty quick. For one thing, that drop is going to be a good thing to check out, especially for sea trout. They like to hang out on those edges and those drops to ambush their prey. They can sit on the bottom, and as bait goes over those drops, they can jump out and ambush their prey. And also the points. And as you can see on this point, you do have some color change on there. It looks like you might have some grass on there, or it might just be a muddy area. Usually when you're fishing these sandy flats, it's going to be a little bit of hard bottom there. And when you see these color changes, it could be a softer area. It might be a pothole that was there when there was grass in the area. So it'll be a depth change as well. So looking for those color changes is, again, one of the top things that I look for when I'm looking on the map in an area. And another thing when you're fishing an area like this is you'll notice these little creeks that you can't really see when you're zoomed out. You really can't see it. That's why you really have to be zoomed in and pretty much just walking along the shoreline using the map. And that's one thing I found here was this very small creek along the shoreline. And again, it's something different, something unique that isn't on the shoreline all over the place. It's only one little spot right here. And even right outside the creek, you can see there's some color change on the bottom there. Looks like the water comes out that way. Let's see where the pass is. Yeah, the pass is over here. So if water's coming out of that creek, it's going to be going towards the pass. And as you can see, that color changes right there. So maybe it's dug out a little bit deeper, or maybe there's some potholes there. But again, it's something that those fish can relate to. And when you have that color change on the bottom in an area where you have a sandbar like that, those fish can camouflage themselves on the bottom using that. Also in the wintertime, those fish can use those darker splotches on the bottom to help warm themselves up because they're going to warm up quicker than those lighter colored areas. So just another thing to show there as far as looking at the maps and what you're looking at.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. That's a great point about the color change. So it's great. We're fortunate in Central Florida to have pretty clear water. In many cases, a lot of these maps were done in really clear water conditions. So we can actually identify, like in most cases, especially after a little bit of practice, you'll be able to identify an oyster bar versus like a little seagrass patch versus just like a sandbar. But in areas where it's a little bit more murky, just seeing a color change is a good sign. So you don't even have to know exactly what it is. Just the fact that it's color change means it's something different. Just like Tony said, it could be an oyster bar, it could be a seagrass patch, it could be a pothole that's just collected some just dark stuff on the bottom. So regardless of what that is, it's generally a good sign, and it's often worth checking out, especially if it's like the only unique thing in that area. So super important.
I was trying to see here if I can find an example of what you're saying there. There was an area that I was looking at.
So this is obviously Google Maps. How often are you guys switching it up to MapQuest or even Google Earth or anything else?
That's usually if I'm looking at an area and it does look murky or dirty. When I'm looking at Google Maps, I'll switch to Bing or MapQuest because different image providers take images at different times of the year. So the water might be clear in images on MapQuest and they might be dirty on images on Google. So it's really good to utilize those different services to get different images of the area. So again, if you're fishing or if you're looking at an area and it looks dark on the map, try looking at that area again on a different provider. And that's usually when I'm looking at different map services. But if it all looks good on Google, then I'll just continue using Google. Google's been updating. It seems like they've been updating their images a lot more recently. So I've been sticking with Google most of the time.
Yeah, and it's the easiest to, I feel like this is the most user friendly of them all as well, which I like. And even like the street view, like if I'm taking the paddleboard out and I just want to be able to know, or if I'm fishing from shore, I just want to be able to know if I can actually get there or not. And that street view is really, really cool. You can literally, like, it's basically have a streetcar. If you haven't used it, they have a little streetcar that goes around. They've been on pretty much every street by now. And you can literally get an image of the ground, like just as if you were right there. So you can check for parking, you can check for accessibility. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, Google, their Google Earth team, like including all the map, everything they have around the Google Earth and map, like their team for that alone is bigger than most corporations in America. It's crazy how much money and manpower they spend on this stuff. Well, what about historical views? I know like Google Earth and some of these have some historical views. You guys are using that much now?
I don't. It's cool to see, but I get way more. I want to see what's the most recent. I'm not too concerned with the past. The past is it's just kind of cool factor to see what a spot looked like, 15 years ago type thing. But I generally stick with the latest and greatest as much as I can.
Yeah, I haven't used the historical stuff much. For me, especially over here, it's pretty depressing looking at the historical images. It's because it looks so healthy and green and grassy. Now it's pretty much just sandbars and mud flats.
Cool. So what other big mistakes that you guys are seeing or hearing? We have many thousands and thousands of members. And by the way, I mean, Tony, as I mentioned, does this every single week. And then Luke and Tony do this and go out and fish the spots they're dissecting and show everything. I mean, like, imagine someone taking a GoPro on their head and then one on their boat or kayak and filming everything from where they launched, where they saw the bait, what fish they caught, what fish they missed. I mean, it's priceless stuff. It's one of the main draws to the Insider Club. And I know you guys get a lot of questions because we put such an emphasis on being able to read maps and then knowing the science behind them. What questions do you see that are the most prevalent in terms of mistakes, things that people are missing?
I think mainly it's just identifying what you're actually seeing on the map. Some people will confuse oyster bars with sandbars, or they might confuse grass with just a deeper area or anything like that. So if you can't if you can't get good at identifying what you're actually seeing on the map, it's going to be hard to fish the area because you obviously don't know what's there. So you won't have a game plan, or you might think it's one thing and have a game plan set in your mind and then get out there and it's completely different than what you thought it was. So you have to change your tactics pretty much on a whim when you get out there on the water. So that's really the biggest mistake I see, is just people missing things, not really analyzing closely. They'll miss, just like that creek I showed up in the Panhandle in that bay. That would have been something a lot of people might have missed because they probably just zoomed out, found a pretty good looking area, and then just loaded up, went out there instead of actually looking for that one area, that one small area, that 10% we were talking about. So just really narrowing it down to a decent looking spot and not getting too overwhelmed with going to, like you said, a magic spot. There really is no magic spot. It all depends on the conditions and the weather, the time of year. All those factors really come into play.
Cool. Do you mind, and Luke, we can talk about your answer to this too. Tony, if you can find a good oyster bar so we can show someone what the difference is between an oyster bar, like maybe if you have one in the back of your head that's like super vivid. And Luke, what do you think in terms of mistakes or most commonly asked questions and frustrations on this stuff?
The frustration, I would say the biggest one is just people getting too focused on spots. Again, that's the big problem. And because no matter, this map reading, it's extremely helpful, right? But it's not everything, right? It's it's impossible to be 100% at picking good spots from these maps, no matter how much, no matter how frequently you do it. You can maximize your odds, right? Maximize structure, maximize, but it's not going to guarantee. Like, there's no guarantee. So what the biggest problem that at least from people that I've been chatting with, who are sending questions. Hey, I followed the basically the sequence. I followed the recipe, and I haven't been having success. Almost always, I'll ask you, okay, like, what happened? And almost always they pick out like one or two spots and they just sit there and hope that it's just going to get better the longer they sit. And that's a big mistake. So on the water assessment is extremely important. So I usually pick out at least 5 spots, knowing that they're not all going to be perfect. And so, it just, obviously, if it's not good, that's not terrible, right? You don't have to get down on yourself. We all do it. But in general, if you do this more and more, in general, it's going to be literally almost impossible for all 5 spots to be a bust. And so if I get the first spot and there's not much action, I'm not seeing much bait, it's just not looking very active, I pick up and go, like, after like 15 minutes. And then if I see bait, if it starts looking good, if the second spot looks good, I'll give it a little bit longer. But if I'm not catching anything, I'll still just pick up and go, regardless if I'm fishing from the boat or from my paddleboard, pick up and go. And because if you're in a dead zone, no matter, there's nothing you can do to get fish to bite if there's no fish there. And so it's better just to search around and spend more time, pick out at least 5 spots, and then spend time going from one to the other, and just being very very keep the eyes open, I should say, for any kind of signs of life, because that's going to be I guess a clue that you need to spend more time there. And but if you don't see anything there, pick up and go.
It's good. All right, Tony, you found one near 4th Street Fishing Pier in 275, huh?
Yep, this is in Tampa Bay.
I fished there many times.
Yeah,
you're giving away Luke's spot. Oh no!
There's many reports, many inside
well.
reports there.
But yeah, when you're zoomed out on the spot, you don't really see too much detail. You see, obviously, the island, you see the coves, but when you zoom in more, that's when you start seeing more detail, such as this random isolated oyster patch right here. And you can tell it's oysters just because it basically looks like a pile of rocks when you zoom in, as you can see there. When you're zoomed out, you might mistake it for maybe just a bump or a patch of sand or something like that. So that's what I mean by people not really doing thorough map reading when they're looking at the maps. Again, right over here, this edge can be kind of hard to tell what it is. It's really just a shallow sandbar with possibly a few shells on it, maybe an old oyster bar. So zooming in can really help you figure out what you're looking at, and also just knowing what you're looking at. Because when you start looking at the maps and you start going to these places and you start seeing what you're seeing on the map when you're out there on the water, that's going to get you better at actually reading the map. So if I was to, let's say I just started map reading and I've never really been to this spot, and I was looking at the map and then I saw this, something unique, go out there, see it's an oyster bar, like, okay, so that's what that looks like. And now you know, and especially if there's fish on it, you can start looking for spots like that.
That's good. Luke, what did you say that one time we did that webinar, I think it was the Clearwater one or one of them, about oyster bars, about what to look for in terms of their patterns and stuff like that? Because not all of them look that perfect when you zoom in.
As far as identifying an oyster bar versus like a seagrass patch.
Yep.
Yeah. So in general, the oysters, and that was that one Tony was just looking at, was like a perfect circle, and that is the case many times, but they're not always just perfect circles. In many cases, they're like kind of ovals, or they kind of have they just have like multiple kind of circles kind of collected. But in general, oyster bars will have a pretty defined and rounded off edges compared to seagrass, which will often have kind of like just splotchy edges, where there'll be like some little parts that go in, some parts that go out, and it kind of like sometimes it just kind of like thinly dies off. Whereas the oysters are generally, there's a unique one that Tony's looking at. It's basically some crazy designs, but you can see some circles in grain, but it's basically a lot of them all kind of combined together. But if you look on the perimeter, if you follow the perimeter, it's almost always a pretty smooth line. And then if you look at on the right part of the screen, for those who are watching on YouTube, that's going to be seagrass. And you can see there's just more sharp lines. There's going to be, in many cases, you can see prop scars, which I hate seeing, by the way. Like, it drives me crazy when people get up on that shallow water like that. But prop scars are generally a sign of seagrass. But just the edges are the key, in that the seagrass is kind of a sharp, not so smooth, and then oyster bars are almost always a nice smooth edge.
Cool, super helpful. Anything else on this, guys?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so that's funny. That's the exact spot that I was gonna. That's near Daytona, right, Tony?
No, this is over Cedar Key, I believe.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
Cedar Key.
Oh, look, there's a spot just like that near Daytona that I was hoping to fish when I was over there. I didn't have a chance. Yeah, so like spots like that, when there's a lot of oysters, it is such a good thing to see. But it is shocking how similar that looks to the other spot.
And something else nice right over here. You've got a point, and then you've got a oyster bar right on the other side of it with a cut going between the two. Again, something unique, something different, multiple types of structure, right in that one little spot.
Absolutely. Yeah, so that's the cool thing about this map reading, is that you can literally use it anywhere. You can pick up, like we've covered pretty much all the Southeast in this webinar. We had Virginia, Texas, and now Florida. But the same premise holds true, is the cool thing. So once you do figure it out, you can literally use it regardless of where you're fishing, and it'll still work, and shockingly well.
Yep. So that was awesome, guys. So really, if you're still here, we got two choices. One is do it yourself, which is completely fine. And I think the three things I wrote down, the big takeaways: maximize structure, the 90-10 rule, right? When you see a new spot and you're dissecting it on your own, eliminate 90%, if you can, of just the areas you know are probably not going to be that good, so you can focus on finding the 10% zones that are. And then just look for things different, right? When you're looking to maximize the structure, look for things that are unique. And just because you see a lot of seagrass doesn't mean it's always a good thing if there's only seagrass in the entire area. So I thought that was awesome. And then so that's option one, is do it yourself. Option two is let us help you out. So Luke and Tony, as we've mentioned a couple times on this podcast/video, is we do this for you every single week. And Luke, you mentioned something critical. It's great to be able to see someone doing this, which is why we do it every week. But the second piece of it, and Tony, you touched on it as well, is seeing someone go to those same spots after you've seen the pre-trip plan and see, oh my gosh, that's what it looks like from someone's GoPro actually fishing the spot. That's where the fish were positioned. That's how I positioned my boat or my kayak to catch those fish. This is the exact kind of bait. I mean, it shortens the time frame. I mean, I think, I don't know how many by years, but I mean, we had people that have said, man, I have been so frustrated for multiple years doing the same old thing over and over and over again. I finally joined the Insider Club. I started watching the dissection videos and the Insider reports, and everything changed. And that's just one piece of the club. We have everything from discounts, mini courses, full-on mastery courses, the cheat sheets. I mean, we just have a plethora of things, including the network, which we touched upon. So I would encourage all of you guys. We have, I believe it's the biggest, boldest, baddest guarantee in the entire fishing industry. I wish all products and services had this same thing, but it's a 365-day, 100% money-back guarantee. So that means if you are not thrilled, if you don't see the amount of fish you're catching skyrocket over the next year, you can get all your money back. And we have about 1% or so of people that ask for their money back, just being transparent. We do have some people to do it, but it's usually about 1 in 100. And we're now closely approaching 10,000 members. We'll probably have them here very soon. And it's because this thing works so well from Texas up to Virginia. So I hope you join us in there. Luke, Tony, anything to add on the Insider Club or just map reading in general and the 90-10 rule and all this great stuff?
I mean, you definitely have to be willing to learn, willing to open up your mind to different ideas and tactics. If you're just set in your ways, you probably won't have that much luck on the water. I know a lot of guys, you know, they're stuck on what they like to do and that's it. But from what I've experienced, if I would have just been set in my ways when I started fishing, I probably be getting skunked every other trip. Now, I mean, just when I started following you guys, I mean, that opened me up to a whole different ball game as far as, you know, what to look for, how to fish, what to use, when to go fish. And if I didn't learn those things, if I wasn't willing to learn those things and change what I was doing, then like I said, I wouldn't be where I am at today.
That was pre-Salt Strong. Now, I mean, you're more muscular, your skin, your hair looks better. Everything about life is better now. Salt Strong.
Yeah, I'm on the kayak more, so getting a lot more of a workout.
And one thing I like to add is that it is some of the feedback I've heard is, oh, I'm not a beginner, so I shouldn't be part of it. This is not for beginners. And if somebody is a beginner and they come in, then they're not a beginner for very long. This is the real tech. The courses, some of the courses are for beginners, but the club, this is very technical. We have hundreds of full-time guides as part of it, so it's for those who really want to get serious about getting out and just maximizing their time in the water. So even if you're extremely experienced, I'm sure that you're gonna learn something. Because now that we have this platform for the club members to share their own reports, now we have thousands of anglers who are serious about fishing and who are super helpful. They're all posting their own reports, showing their tips and tactics. And it's literally impossible not to learn at least one cool tip every single week from at least one of the members. So regardless of your skill level, highly recommend trying it out. This is something I wish was around when I had to figure it out the hard way. And so again, with that guarantee, it's worth a try.
Yeah, all about saving you time and saving you money, and just cutting that learning curve down in half or more. And you can find out more about that at saltstrong.com. You get to meet some of our members and see a ton of different testimonials and just exactly what you get. And there's a little special going on right now too. Wink, wink. Check it out. Finally, if you already are a member and you don't need to go to saltstrong.com to join, please help us out here the month of September. We'd love to go fishing with you. And so all you have to do, once again, is go to iTunes. This is an iTunes only. We're having to do that just to make sure we can control and make sure people aren't taking screenshots of some rent. Because there's like, I don't know how many, I think it's like 40 different places that are now playing our podcast. Some, I don't even know how they get it. There's all these different RSS feeds. So like it has to be on iTunes. That's the only way we're going to do it to keep it fair. So you have to go to iTunes and put in a review, hopefully a 5-star review. If you like this podcast, if you're still listening, it's got to be a 5-star review, and take a screenshot of it and then email it, fish@saltstrong.com. So once again, go to iTunes, subscribe to us if you haven't already, and then go to the review tab, leave an amazing, very, very well, highly embellished review, and then take a screenshot of it and email it, fish@saltstrong.com, and we automatically enter you into the drawing to do a free fishing trip with Luke and myself, Otis, maybe Tony. We'll see what happens. But it'll be
Otis optional. Otis is a bit of a handful.
Yeah. So is Tony, though, you know, so it's debatable. But guys, thank you so much for the time. This was a fun one. Stay tuned. We're going to be doing another one, the three of us, coming up soon on lure size. This is a question that comes up a lot. You know, it's the reason there are so many different size lures. As much as we love the Slam Shady, the 3-inch, the Minnow-Z that we first started with, it's not the best for every single scenario. I think it's the most versatile. Like it can catch the most fish all year long, but there are times where you need to either up it or down it. And we're going to talk all about that on an upcoming episode. So stay tuned. Otherwise, go to saltstrong.com and join the Insider Club today, where we will open up our entire library of these videos just like this with, I don't know how many spots now that we've dissected and fished, but it's a crazy amount. And on top of it, there's like over 7,000 other fishing reports and spots on our little map. It is pretty awesome. That's it, guys. Thank you so much. We be out.
Good times.
Peace.
Take it